Welcome back, class. This is our very last chapter together. Feeling a little bittersweet about that. So we're going to talk about how plants respond to their environment. So if you've ever watched flowers, here's a field full of sunflowers. And their faces follow the sun as it comes up in the east and track it as it goes to the west. So here you can see the sun is setting. All of these flowers, their backs are to us as the front of the flower is facing the sun. Then as the sun sets, they'll turn back to the east, and when the sun comes up, they will follow it again the next day. That following the sun allows them to keep their floral heads warm. They release more chemicals, they attract more chemicals. But that's only one of the things that plants respond to. They're able to respond to light. They're able to respond to heat or to cold. They're able to respond to internal chemical signals like hormones. They're able to respond to touch, whether it's the wind blowing against them or physical touch. They can respond to drought and flooding, to infection by pathogens. A pathogen is something that causes an infection. To wounds from an herbivore eating it, and to gravity. So we're going to talk about how plants are able to respond to all of these things. So plants are not inert. They're not passive. They're able to sense and integrate information all around their environment. So even though plant development may seem simple, they may seem like just little things that just grow where they're put. They have cells and a molecular biology that is as complex as any animal cell is. They'll respond to their environment, and in response to their environment, they will alter their growth and their development. One simple example is if you've ever had a potato that just kind of gets left in a back pantry, kind of in the dark. When the potato is growing in the dark, it will show etiolation. Etiolation are physical adaptations for growing in the darkness. That potato will develop roots, these things sometimes called eyes, but it won't develop any greenery. But once it's been exposed to daylight, it will go through de-etiolation or greening. So it'll start producing leaves. It's not going to waste any energy producing leaves without sunlight, because if it doesn't have light, it won't be able to do photosynthesis. And that production of leaves has just been wasted. Instead, it needs to produce stronger roots to be able to grow in the dark. So it won't produce greening until that light is available. Roots have cellular receptors that are able to detect changes in their environment. Here would be an example of the cell membrane, the cell wall. Here's a receptor in its cell membrane. It can respond to a hormone. It could respond to light. It could respond to just about anything there could be receptors for. But for that stimulus to be able to elicit a response, there has to be an appropriate receptor on the cell. And it's that stimulation of the receptor that then sends a signal transduction into the cell to say, hey, you need to activate these certain responses. So a cell's response to light is an example of light hitting the receptor, the signal being transduced and processed to give a response of light is available, time to start making greenery. Hormones are chemical signals that coordinate different parts of an organism. We've discussed hormones in animals, but hormones are also very important in plants. They can signal tropism, which is a response of a plant curving towards or away from a stimulus. And tropism is also often caused by hormones. So phototropism would be growth in response to a light, turning towards or away from a light. Thigmotropism would be response to touch, so moving towards or moving away from a touch. And gravitropism would be a response to gravity. All right, so now you can tell me, how does etiolation help a seedling compete successfully? Let's continue our talk of hormones. So in general, hormones will control plant growth. They'll control development. They'll affect the division, the elongation, and differentiation of plant cells. By definition, plant hormones are used in very low concentrations, but even a tiny amount can affect the growth and development of a plant organ. The first hormone we're going to talk about is auxin. Auxin is on this chart in orange. You can see that it helps seedlings grow and elongate, so it's important here in parts of the plant development where it's growing. Cytokinins work along with auxins. You can see they're also available at the same time. And often it is the relationship of how much auxin is available to how much cytokinin is available that determines what the plant will be doing. So as the auxins are promoting the cells to grow, cytokinins are promoting the cells to start dividing so that you don't just have large cells, you have more cells. Cytokinins can also slow down the aging in flowers and fruits. Gibberellins are important here in germination, so they help trigger that plant to germinate, and they will stimulate the flowering and elongation of the plants. Some of these hormones can be available and used in botany or in agriculture. So an auxin could be used to help stimulate root growth. So if you take a cutting of a plant, you can dip it in powdered material that contains auxins, and it can stimulate that plant cutting to start developing roots. Cytokinins can be used to slow down the aging of fruits so that they are at a more ideal stage when they get to the grocery store. And gibberellins can be used to trigger plants to germinate so that they are available to grow when the market wants it rather than waiting until it would naturally grow. Ethylene is used to stimulate fruit ripening. Ethylene is also used to trigger leaf drop or abscission. So ethylene can be used to treat a plant with that, to promote it to ripen, to make it ripen more quickly. A lot of plants, though, will be kept from ethylene, so they'll be picked when they're still green, have ethylene kept away from them, put on some carbon dioxide to prevent them from making ethylene, so that that fruit will stay green and not ripen, so that, you can keep apples to sell year round or something like that. It's not until you trigger them with ethylene that they'll actually start to ripen. Brassinosteroids and strignolactones are some of the newer discovered types of plant hormones. Brassinosteroids can be also called plant steroids. They help regulate reproductive cycles of plants and how robust a plant is. So they're very similar to sex hormones in animals. Strignolactones promote seed germination. They also control apical dominance, if you remember what that apical bud is doing to control the plant development. And they can attract mycorrhizal fungi to the root. So here's leaf abscission.
Why do trees lose their leaves? In certain parts of our world, known as temperate zones, trees must have some sort of protection to survive the freezing temperatures and cold, drying winds of winter. Stems and buds have coatings and structures that allow them to withstand harsh conditions. Broad, flat leaves are quite delicate and could freeze in the winter, so the trees either lose their leaves all at once, or they produce small, narrow, flattened leaves with extra protection to survive the winter. Leaf abscission refers to the loss of leaves in deciduous trees. It's preceded by events that protect sites where leaves were once attached. Where the petiole joins the stem, an abscission layer forms, consisting of weak, colorless, thin-walled cells that allow the leaf to separate easily when a gust of wind comes along. Meanwhile, a protective layer of densely colored cells has formed between the abscission layer and the stem. These protective cells are filled with waxy material that forms a thick seal over the place where the leaf will detach. New growth comes from the axillary bud that's already formed in the angle between the leaf and the stem. Think of losing a leaf as scraping your skin, only to find a protective scab already in place. Now let's watch leaf abscission. Notice that the leaf changes color during abscission. Why do leaves change color before they fall? During the autumn months, when temperatures begin to decrease and daylight diminishes, the abscission layer begins to form, slowly cutting off the transport of water and sugars between leaf and stem and signaling the end of sugar production in the leaves. At the same time, chlorophyll breaks down and the intense green color of the leaf begins to fade. With the fading of the chlorophyll, we begin to see the yellow and orange hues of the carotenoids, pigments that were present all along in the chloroplasts. Simultaneously, if the abscission layer forms before all the chlorophyll has broken down, and while the days are still sunny and warm, sugars may be trapped in the vacuole of each palisade cell. If sugars are trapped and prevented from moving away from the blade to the stem, their relative concentration within each cell increases and triggers the production of deep purple or scarlet red anthocyanin pigments. The combination of yellow, orange, red, and purple within dying leaves provides spectacular fall color in some parts of the world. Sometimes we see colorful patterns in a single leaf, as in this ornamental pear.
All right. A couple more hormones. Jasmonates are also one of the newer discovered types of plant hormones, and they do a lot of things. They can help control fruit ripening, the development of flowers, production of pollen, coiling of tendrils, roots growth, seed germination, nectar secretion, and most important, response to pathogens and herbivory. So a pathogen, something that causes a disease, and herbivory, when that plant is getting eaten. Then abscisic acid, originally thought to be in charge of abscission, actually does not have anything to do with leaf abscission. It promotes dormancy. So that plant will be creating abscisic acid when it is going to go dormant. And through that seed of the winter being dormant, it can help protect that seed through periods of drought. And often in the spring, a lot of rains come, and that rain will wash off some of that excess abscisic acid to allow that seed to start to germinate. All right, at this point, you can tell me, if a plant has a mutation that makes gibberellin excessively active, what will be the phenotype of that plant? What hormone regulates a plant reproductive cycle? What plant hormone triggers a seed to remain dormant through the winter? All right, come back to me for the second video in this chapter. We will talk about how a plant responds to light, to gravity, to touch, to all sorts of stuff going on in its world. I'll see you later. Bye.